You thought awakening would bring clarity, energy, purpose, but instead everything stopped. Your goals feel meaningless, your motivation disappeared, your mind is quiet, but not in a peaceful way. More like a sacred silence you didn't ask for. Carl Jung saw this long before it became a trend. He never used words like high vibrations or quantum shifts, but he knew what happens when the unconscious becomes conscious. It doesn't feel like enlightenment. It feels like a collapse. The collapse of who you thought you were. The one who chased dreams, planned 5-year goals and needed validation to feel alive. Suddenly, and that person is gone. And in their place, there's a fog, a holy pause, a space between two selves, one that's dying and one that hasn't yet emerged. And this is where most people panic. They think they're broken. They try to go back. But what if this stillness isn't the end? What if it's the most important part of your transformation? Jung called this sacred confusion a rite of passage. The ego calls it failure. But the soul calls it preparation. So if you're here numb, uncertain, asking, what's wrong with me? Nothing is wrong. You're not lazy. You're not lost. You're just standing at the edge of who you used to be and what you're about to become. This is the doorway, and everything begins on the other side. Most people believe that spiritual awakening feels like stepping into a golden light, and in many ways it does, but what no one talks about is what comes after. After the light comes silence, after the ecstasy comes emptiness. And in this sacred space, between who you were and who you are not yet, the real journey begins. Carl Jung once said, "Enlightenment doesn't come by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." And that takes courage, because the darkness he speaks of isn't out there. It lives inside us, in the beliefs we've inherited, the wounds we've buried, the roles we've played just to survive. What you feel right now might seem confusing. You might think you're lost, but maybe this is the greatest gift your soul has ever received. This moment of stillness, of spiritual fatigue, of feeling like nothing makes sense. It's not failure, it's a calling. A quiet invitation to reconnect with what's real, to stop performing the ideal self and meet the true one, the one that doesn't need to prove, please, or pretend, the one that simply is. That's why we created this space, to guide awakened souls like you through this invisible bridge between the old and the new, to remind you that what you're feeling isn't weakness, it's sacred sensitivity. And yes, there is a way forward. If you want to go deeper into your inner healing, we've prepared a special self-healing ebook inspired by Carl Jung's most powerful teachings. You'll find the link pinned in the top comment of this video. It's a gentle guide to help you make sense of this journey and start rebuilding your life from the soul outward, not the surface inward. And of course, if this message speaks to you, subscribe to the channel, because every week we'll continue to walk this path together. You're not alone, and your awakening is just the beginning. When the old you dies, the disorientation after awakening. There's a strange moment after awakening, one that few people talk about. It's not bliss, it's not clarity, it's the quiet collapse of everything you thought you were. You begin to notice a dullness in your drive, a fading of ambition, a strange numbness in place of your former fire. The goals you once chased no longer matter. The routines that once anchored your day now feel meaningless. You wake up and feel like you don't recognize your own life, and perhaps more unsettling, you don't recognize yourself. Carl Jung didn't describe this moment using modern spiritual jargon, but he understood it deeply. He spoke of a kind of psychological death, a dissolution of the persona, the mask we wear to fit into society. Before awakening, most of your motivation came from that mask. You moved through life seeking approval, recognition, success. You created goals that matched the identity you believed was you, but then something shifted. You saw through the illusion, and with that seeing, the fuel that drove your old life began to disappear. This is not depression in the clinical sense. It's not laziness, it's not failure. It's the sacred pause between identities. It's the liminal space where one self dissolves and another begins to form, but hasn't yet arrived. You are no longer the person you used to be, but you are not yet who you are becoming. And in that gap, motivation, at least as you knew it, vanishes. Jung called this process individuation. It's the path of becoming whole, of integrating the conscious and unconscious mind. But before integration comes fragmentation. The old structures of self must collapse to make room for something more authentic. The breakdown is not a mistake. It's not a setback. It is the very path, and it's disorienting. You may feel like your mind is silent. You may find yourself uninterested in everything you used to love. You might lose touch with time, with desire, with the sense of progress. Nothing feels urgent anymore. It's not that you don't care. It's that what you cared about wasn't really yours. It belonged to the mask, and the mask has fallen. This moment is often misunderstood in our productivity-obsessed world. We are taught that purpose must always come with momentum, that clarity must lead to action, that healing is measured by output. But Jung would argue the opposite. True healing often requires stillness, a sacred silence, a complete unraveling of the known self. You might feel like you're doing nothing, but in truth your entire inner world is recalibrating. The ego, the I that drove your previous life, is dissolving, not vanishing. It's losing its grip on control, on image, on outcome. And in its place, something deeper is beginning to whisper. At first, the silence can be terrifying. You want to do something, anything, to feel like yourself again. But that's just the old programming seeking comfort in motion. The truth is, you're not supposed to feel like your old self, because you're not that person anymore. This in-between phase, the cocoon, the soup between caterpillar and butterfly, is essential. It's where the soul breathes, where illusions fall away, where all the layers you built to survive begin to peel back. And what remains is raw, vulnerable, real. Jung taught that we cannot bypass this darkness. Enlightenment, he said, doesn't come by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This moment, the absence of motivation, is that darkness. It's not the end of the path, it's the passage through the underworld, the test of whether you can stay present with yourself when there is nothing left to achieve, prove, or fix. And yet, this is exactly where your true self begins to form. Not in the rush of ambition, not in the applause of others, but in the quiet recognition that you don't need to perform anymore. You don't need to chase anything. You're already becoming just by allowing what is. You're not lazy. You're not broken. You're evolving. And this evolution demands rest, stillness, softness. It asks you to stop measuring your worth by productivity and start listening to the inner stirrings of something new. This is where the seeds of real motivation are planted. Not the kind that burns fast and loud, but the kind that grows from within, steady and true. It may take time, it may come in whispers, but when it returns it will be rooted not in fear but in alignment. It won't ask, what should I do to be enough? It will ask, what feels honest to who I am now? That's the shift. From ego-driven momentum to soul-guided movement. From urgency to truth. From proving to simply being. So if you find yourself in this silent in-between, don't rush, don't panic, don't fill it with noise. Let it be empty. Let it be quiet. Because in that space, you're not losing yourself. You're finally meeting the self that's been waiting behind the mask all along. Living from the true self. When motivation becomes a whisper, not a shout, as you move deeper into the process of awakening, something shifts, not just inside you, but in how you relate to the world. You begin to notice that the energy you once spent pushing, proving, or performing is being redirected. It's no longer about efforting your way into success or worth. It becomes about allowing, about aligning, about responding, not reacting. Carl Jung spoke often about individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you truly are, not who your family expected, not who society shaped, not even who your younger self dreamed of being, but who your soul has always known you were. And this becoming doesn't require a master plan, it requires presence. When you're aligned with your true self, motivation changes form. It becomes subtle, it becomes embodied. It shows up not as a pressure, but as a pull. You're no longer chasing something outside of you to feel complete. You're letting what's already within you lead the way. This can be disorienting at first. The world is loud. It celebrates the hustle, the grind, the constant doing. but you are learning to listen to a quieter voice, a voice that doesn't rush, a voice that waits, a voice that honors timing, rhythm, and depth over speed. You'll begin to notice that your choices feel different now. Instead of asking, what will get me ahead, you start to ask, what feels aligned? Instead of wondering, will they approve, you begin to wonder, is this true for me? And those questions lead to different actions. Actions that are not always glamorous but always rooted. You may begin to walk away from things that once made you feel powerful but were draining your soul. You may leave behind relationships, jobs, roles, even cities, not out of rebellion, but because you've outgrown the person you had to be to survive them. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. And that privilege often requires sacrifice, not material sacrifice, but emotional release, letting go of attachments, of narratives, of the identity that once gave you comfort, but no longer gives you peace. You start to redefine what fulfillment means. It's no longer a full schedule. It's a full heart. It's no longer ticking off accomplishments. It's waking up in integrity with yourself. It's doing less, but feeling more. It's allowing the quiet joy of authenticity to replace the loud noise of approval. Motivation becomes a byproduct of alignment. When your soul is at peace, action flows. Not because you have to, but because you want to. Not because you're afraid of missing out, but because something inside you says, yes, this matters. You'll also start to notice how sensitive you've become to energy, to environments, to your own inner states. This sensitivity is not weakness, it's awareness. It means you're tuned in. It means you're awake. And from that sensitivity, you begin to make decisions that honor your nervous system, your boundaries, your joy. The old version of you might have felt guilty for resting, for saying no, for walking away from what others praised. But the true self doesn't seek applause, it seeks alignment. It doesn't chase drama, it chooses peace. And the more you choose peace, the clearer your life becomes. This clarity isn't loud. It arrives like sunlight through curtains, gradual, warm, undeniable. You begin to see which relationships are reciprocal and which are performative, which goals come from your soul and which came from fear. You stop asking, what should I do? And start asking, what wants to move through me? The body becomes a compass, the heart becomes a filter, and intuition becomes a guide. You don't need every answer, you need presence. You don't need a perfect plan. You need to feel grounded in the now. And from that groundedness, creation happens. Healing happens. Clarity happens. Not as events, but as unfolding, as organic emergence. You realize that the true self is not a static identity. It's a living energy. It breathes, it evolves, and your only job is to keep listening. In this space, even your relationship with time changes. You no longer feel the urgency to force things. You begin to trust divine timing, not as an idea, but as a lived truth. You understand that some chapters take longer because they're building deeper roots, and you stop comparing your path to others. You realize that your rhythm is sacred. You also start to forgive yourself for the years spent in survival mode, for the masks you wore, for the ways you abandoned yourself just to feel safe. You understand now you weren't wrong. You were adapting, and that adaptation led you here. Living from the true self means living in congruence. It means your words match your values, your actions match your truth, your presence speaks before you say anything. And that congruence radiates. It creates safety, trust, and magnetism. You become someone who no longer begs for connection, but attracts it through authenticity. You don't manipulate energy, you embody clarity. And in that embodiment, others feel permission to do the same. That's the power of living aligned. It doesn't just heal you, it heals your space. It changes the room. It opens doors you didn't knock on, and the motivation that now moves through you is quieter, but far more powerful. It's rooted in love, not fear, in clarity, not confusion, in devotion, not performance. So if you find yourself today not as driven by old goals, not motivated in the traditional sense, don't panic. That silence inside is sacred. That lack of desire for the artificial is a sign of alignment. You're no longer hungry for things that never fed you. You're finally ready for nourishment, not noise, and that is a sign not of emptiness but of truth. This silence is not the end. It's the beginning of everything. If you've made it this far, it means you're no longer satisfied with surface answers. You're not looking for another quick fix or a new mask to wear. You're searching for what's real, for what lasts. And that search is the beginning of becoming. You see, most people think the spiritual awakening ends with fireworks, with clarity, with joy, with divine certainty. But that's just the illusion our egos love. The truth? The real awakening begins when you lose the map, when nothing makes sense anymore, when the goals you once chased no longer excite you, when the identities you wore so proudly begin to fall away, like autumn leaves surrendering to gravity. And that loss, it hurts. But it's a sacred hurt because beneath it, something eternal is waking up. Carl Jung never promised ease. He knew the journey to the self would require not only courage, but surrender. Not only love, but destruction. The destruction of the persona, of all the false selves you had to become just to survive. And when those selves fall, you're left with silence, a terrifying, beautiful silence. But this silence is not a void, it is a womb. It is the space where the soul reshapes itself without interference, where your old fuel, fear, comparison, performance, no longer works, and a new fire starts to burn, softer, deeper, true. Maybe today you feel like you've lost your spark. Maybe your friends don't understand what you're going through. Maybe the things you used to love now feel distant, disconnected. That's not failure. That's transformation. And transformation doesn't rush. It waits until you're still enough to hear. Because now motivation doesn't come from pressure. It comes from peace. Purpose doesn't come from strategy. It comes from resonance. You no longer have to force. You don't need to chase. You are being moved from the inside out. That's why your body slows down. That's why your mind rebels against busyness. That's why silence feels more honest than performance. Because the false self is dying, and the true self is stretching its wings quietly, patiently, powerfully. Jung called it individuation. Others call it coming home. I call it the beginning of a life that finally makes sense. Not because it's perfect, but because it's yours. And here's the beauty. You don't need to explain this to anyone. You don't need permission to slow down. You don't need applause to follow what feels right. Your healing is not a performance. It is a private act of revolution. You are allowed to rest. You are allowed to not know. You are allowed to outgrow your old life, even if that life looked successful on the outside. Because healing is not about getting back to who you were. It's about becoming who you were always meant to be, before the world told you otherwise. So what do you do now? You listen. You follow the quiet. You honor the seasons of your soul. You stop asking how to get back your old motivation, and instead, ask what your soul is inviting you into now, and maybe you'll begin to feel it, not as a command but as a whisper, a gentle yes, a sense of calm urgency, a pull towards something that feels like truth. Follow that, even if it scares you. Especially if it scares you, because what's waiting on the other side of this pause isn't emptiness, it's embodiment. The new version of you is not louder. It's more still, not more ambitious, but more anchored, not more perfect, but more free. You'll begin to notice how much less you need to prove, how much more space you have for joy, how deeply you begin to respect your own rhythm, and you'll realize something sacred. This is what it feels like to be whole, not to be done, but to be real. And that wholeness, it's not a destination, it's a practice. It's a daily invitation to live in integrity with your soul, to choose what aligns even if no one understands, to rest without guilt, to say yes only when it's honest, to say no without apology. If you're in that in-between space right now, if the world feels loud and your heart feels quiet, trust that you're not broken. You're just awakening, not to an ideal, but to yourself. And if this message resonated, if it helped you find words for what you've been feeling, I created something to go deeper. It's not for everyone, but if you're walking through this sacred silence, searching for meaning, searching for yourself, I invite you to download the ebook I wrote specifically for souls on this path. It's not a step-by-step manual. It's a mirror, a companion, a deeper reflection on healing, individuation, and the inner transformation Carl Jung spoke of. You'll find it pinned in the comments. And if you want more content like this, videos that don't just explain psychology but help you feel it, subscribe. This space was created for seekers like you, for those who are no longer afraid of their own depth, because the journey doesn't end here. This is where it truly begins.